Hello chess friends and welcome to your side of chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit Declined series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from white's and from black's perspective, and today we're continuing with our Queen's Gambit Declined studies and the so-called Albin Countergambit. The Albin Countergambit we have started recently. First we have seen this attractive Lasker trap, and then I've introduced to you the most important traps from white's and from black perspective, but also the most important mistakes that you should try to avoid when you're playing the game from white's perspective, but also when you're playing the game from black's perspective. So today we're starting our first line. Today we're analyzing the so-called normal line of the Albin Countergambit. It will be an idea of white when white is playing the move knight to f3 followed with a3 and similar ideas. White is trying to get an expansion on the queen side with a3 b4. I'll explain of course what it's all about when we come to the point, but first let's see now a beautiful and sharp tactical gameplay by the Stockfish engine with the black pieces against another top engine Revenge. You see also their rating here, they're really high, so it's really a top engine game in the Albin Countergambit. And the cool part about this game is that Stockfish won the game with the Albin Countergambit. I'm not sure how many top grandmasters of these days would dare to play the Albin Countergambit. The only maybe top grandmaster that I've seen playing the Albin Countergambit was Alexander Morozovich, and he had some kind of success with this opening, but not the other top grandmasters. Didn't see maybe Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, or maybe Alireza Firuza playing this sharp opening. But the Stockfish engine is showing us now many times that basically every opening is possible, and here, as I said, Stockfish will brutalize its opponent in the Albin Countergambit. Then in the continuation of the series, I'll explain of course also some different methods in the normal line, but we'll see also the fianchetto variations, also some very important sidelines of the opening. But let's see now this beauty by the Stockfish engine. So the first move is of course d4 by Revenge. We have d5 by Stockfish. We have c4, the Queen's Gambit, and after move e5 we have the Queen's Gambit Declined, but also the so-called Albin Countergambit. And of course you have to take d takes e5. We have now this idea d4 passing through. As I always like to say here in these types of structures, the main idea of blacks is to create a space advantage, which means now we have already a pawn on the other side of the board. We want to support this pawn by playing knight to f6, knight to c6, bishop to c5, and then with ideas of knight to e7, knight to g6, we want to recapture the pawn on e5, and then black would have a solid game. Here in the continuation we have knight to f3, and after move knight to c6 we have now this move a3, and this is now a very popular idea of white. White is playing many times this lines because many times, as we said, we have to play something like, I don't know, knight to e7, knight to g6, even queen to e7 in some occasions is necessary, just in order to maybe play something like queen takes e5 afterwards in order to keep the pressure around the square e5, or in some occasions black is trying some ideas of bishop to e6 or maybe bishop to g4, but then with queen to d7 and then queenside castling, black is trying to get a queenside castling idea, then support further with the rook on d8. If you could just imagine the position when black would have already castled on the queen side, then of course the rook on d8 would be supporting the d4 pawn, and then of course black is trying to launch a flank attack with h4, h5, h4, g5, g4 and similar stuff, because many times because of this annoying pawn on d4, white is pretty much forced to play the move g3 in order to develop the light square bishop here on g2, because e3 it's sometimes not a possibility because of this annoying pawn on d4. So that's why when you have already here the fianchetto, that's why black is trying many times to attack the fianchetto by creating a flank attack. So that's why after move a3, in my opinion, white is already sensing that black could actually castle queenside. So that's why white is playing this move early and hopes that you castle queenside, then white would be much faster on the attack. White would play something like b4, b5, even c5 maybe is an opportunity, maybe a4, a5. Will simply push the pawns further and will try to destroy you after you have castle on the queen side. So that's why Stockfish played here interesting idea, which was of course many times also played in international master level, grandmaster level. Stockfish played now simply the move a5, because in my opinion, as we said, if you try to play these lines, which I really don't like, in my opinion it's simply too passive, because you played already once with the knight, then you play a second time with the knight on g6, then probably you've play a third time with the knight just in order to recapture your pawn on e5, and meanwhile white is doing something. Meanwhile white will probably expand here on the queen side with the move b4. Okay, you're trying this idea, but you see now bishop to b2 could be of course the continuation knight to e5, the knight to e5, and here after knight to e5 e3. That's the line that I don't like, although bishop to e6 is still an opportunity. Probably black can challenge also the c4 pawn, but in my opinion it's something that it's in white's favor. So that's why I like always more this line by black. Black is now staying here with this very important control of the b4, and is hoping now to get the bishop on c5, where it couldn't be attacked of course anymore by the pawn. And now our pawn on d4 is standing, so this is now our main strength, the pawn on d4. So that's why we want to keep the strength and just continue the game with this annoying pawn really on the square. So that's why here some ideas for white are simply not working. So after move a5, here b3 was played by the top engine Revenge, although probably now you have to play e3. You have to challenge this pawn immediately, because the black would be forced now to play bishop to c5, and after something like, I don't know, e takes d4. The problem for black a little bit here in this position is that you have to recapture with the bishop. You don't need to recapture here with the knight, because if you recapture with the knight, then bishop to e3 will happen, and probably many pieces will be traded off. So that's why you have to play with the bishop. But now the problem is, I think that white should not play knight takes d4, because you will play queen to d4 immediately. And look at this now, if you play queen to d4, knight to d4, and you see now there are many threats here. Knight to c2, knight to b3 are opportunities. You have to play probably even here rook to a2, just in order to prevent the fork here. But now with bishop to e6, I think black has a comfortable game. Even b5 will be an opportunity to continue the pressure here. So as I said, from this point on, black has really a comfortable game. So but probably after move, let's see, bishop to c5 and e takes d4, bishop to d4, white should not touch this bishop in the center of the board. White should simply develop with bishop to e2, and then of course knight to e7, castling probably also by black. And then maybe in some occasions you could try now knight to d4, but again queen to d4 is, I think, something that bothers many times a white in the continuation of the game. I think when you're playing with the white pieces, you want to get more out of particular openings. Now again, there is this threat, even if you try now this one, queen to d4, again knight to d4, you have to play something like knight to c3 in order to protect your bishop. I think black can immediately simplify the game and take out the bishop, but again bishop to e6 I think is perfectly fine here. Rook to d8 here. Black has reached equality in an early stage of the game, which is of course perfectly fine for black. So as I said, even this e3 is probably much better, and in the continuation of the series we'll discuss more about this move, because it's a must move, I think, here for white. It's the only way to make good progress here in order to make something happen. As I said, in the continuation we'll explain more. In this particular game, b3 was played by Revenge, but I think we should really study deeper and deeper this opening lines, because it's simply our opening preparation. This is not just a coverage of one particular game. I really wanted to show you many ideas that are possible in the Albin Countergambit. Now b3 is a little bit weak, because many times we can try ideas of a4 just in order to split the pawn chain, or at least fix the pawn structure on the queen side. But now after move b3, Stockfish plays on the normal idea, bishop to c5, supporting now this annoying pawn on d4, which is perfectly fine. This pawn is such an unpleasant thing that bothers, I think, white in the continuation of the game. So we have here knight from b to d2, we have bishop to f5. So you see Stockfish gets a beautiful setup. The bishops are perfectly fine. Knight is controlled the center of the board. This knight can be included into the game, but probably will take out also the e5 pawn in the near future. So we have here bishop to b2. Revenge is continuing the pressure around the square d4. We have knight to e7 and now e6. So this is now sort of an idea to at least provoke some weaknesses, or at least to make this bishop passive, because okay, you could try maybe here f takes e6, but probably you will face many light square problems here. So that's why this idea by Revenge was at least to provoke some weaknesses in black's camp by sacrificing a pawn, because the pawn cannot be protected anyway. Even if you try some ideas of, I don't know, g3, then white get challenged with the move knight to g6. You could try maybe bishop to g2, but now after castling, black can actually take knight takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and although black will probably lose the pawn on b7, but now with rook to b8, bishop to g2, this is, I think, defendable for black. In the here, black is even better because of the activity on the b file. We have to say that the queen and the knight are a little bit paralyzed to the defense of the b3 pawn, but also in the near future we can expect an e file attack, because the pawn on the e pawn cannot be improved. Even if you do that, then of course the bishop's activity will be shown here. So as I said, the problem in this position, I think, is the e pawn by white, but also the b pawn. So this was the continuation. For instance, if black wouldn't be challenged with the move e6, if for instance white would have continued here with the normal g3. But okay, here after move e6, Stockfish simply takes with the bishop. We have now knight to e4, attacking the bishop on c5, and now bishop to a7. So we're protecting still here from black's perspective this very important d4 pawn. So although in some occasions I think we can even try some basics ideas, we could even, I think, fix the pawn structure here. Even if white takes here, knight takes c5, then b takes c5 is perfectly fine. Again, I think we could have some ideas of rook to b8 and then continue the pressure on the b file. But okay, here after move bishop to e6, as we said, knight to e4, we have bishop to a7, and now queen to c2 by the revenge engine, and we have here knight to f5. Again, a move that is controlling further the d4 strength. So it's our main strength. Sometimes it can be also a little bit of weakness if you cannot protect it, if white grabs the pawn in a good way. But from this point on, I think black has a comfortable game. Black has a dominant position in the center of the board, has a good piece activity. We have to say it because many times in this Albin Countergambit stuff, you don't have a good development because you have lost many tempi with the same piece. But now I think the setup that Stockfish has here is pretty decent. We have still opportunities to play something like queen to e7, getting the queen where the queen would be very active, also of course on the e file, and still with the flexibility to castle even queen side if necessary, and also to castle king side. So really good setup here by the Stockfish engine. So after move knight to f5, we have knight to g5 attacking the bishop, bishop to c8, and now queen side castling here by the revenge engine, creating of course some pressure here on the d file. So now a very important move, queen to e7, because you cannot castle immediately. That would be of course very cool if you could castle. Then of course you have a good setup, you have a secured king. But the problem is now this move g4, you have to step back here when you move the king, when you move the knight, then of course you'll get checkmated on h7. So that's why queen to e7 very important. Now g4 comes with the same idea, but now a very important move, knight to h4, because here after knight to h4, of course this knight is not protected anymore, and now with queen to g5 the knight would be lost on h4. So that's why this is not possible. In the continuation after knight to h4, we have queen to e4 by revenge, and Stockfish simplifies the game by playing knight to f3, queen to e7, king to e7. After knight to f3, Stockfish grabs a pawn and has now, I think, an equal position, at least an equal position. All of the d4 pawn will be taken, but there is still pressure around the square f2. We have seen also the e2 is a little bit weak in some occasions. As we said, all of these pawns could be weakness. We have still the opportunity to play something like a4, maybe to split a little bit and weaken the pawn structure here on the queen side. So still good opportunities here for black. So after move bishop to g4, knight to d4, we have a rook to d8, we have knight takes c6, b takes c6. Again, Stockfish plays on the same idea, just in order to open the b file and attack the b3 weakness. We have bishop to g2. That was the continuation by revenge. But even if you try bishop to g7, this is not even better, because you get this one, bishop takes f2, and then rook to d8. Okay, rook takes d8, then you could maybe retreat here to c3, but now rook to b8. And the problem is now if you take, black will also take out this pawn, probably will eventually take out this pawn. So nothing wrong with this idea. Even if you try, I don't know, king to b2, then of course, as we said, a4 will happen, and now the position is a little bit messed up. Even if you try, I don't know, a king to c2 in order to maybe get out of the b file, then it's even worse, because there is also this trap, bishop to f5, you have to step back, and now after a4, b4, bishop to e4 is winning the game. the rook is trapped here. So you have to be careful also here from white's perspective when it comes to your rook activity. So these are of course tiny little tactics that this top engines are not missing, but I think now strategically after b takes c6, black should be much better, because especially because of the potential activity here on the b file. So as we said, here was the continuation: bishop to g2, we have bishop to f2, we have bishop to c3, bishop to e3, king to c2, we have trades of rooks. Now this rook comes into the game, protects the c6 square, and now bishop to d4 attacks of course this pawn, but also this pawn on g7. We have c5, bishop takes c7, and now bishop to d4. Stockfish locks the d file, which is now very important to keep this rook out of game. So here bishop to f3, bishop to f5, first a check, e4, bishop to d7 is of course again an idea to play a4 finally, and then of course to create some madness on the queen side. So we have now h4, g6, very important move, because if you would not have played, if you play, I don't know, let's see, h6, then you could be paralyzed a little bit by this move, by the move h5. Then of course g6 would be very unpleasant, because then you leave also the h6 a little bit unprotected. But okay, here after move h4 we have g6, rook to d2, h5, we have bishop to f4, king to e8, and now after bishop to g3, bishop to c8, we have now a4, and finally bishop to g4. Here Stockfish realized that it would be probably okay to create now a passer on the g file after potential trades of bishops. That was also the continuation. We have h6, g4, but now with f5 these two pawns could be connected, and of course when we create two connected pass pawns, this could be very unpleasant then for our opponent here. Then f4 could be a possibility, then f3, g3, f2, g2, you know, these pawns were low, and probably one of them will be promoted to queen. So really good endgame technique here by the Stockfish engine. So after move h6, g4, we have rook to g2, we have a rook to e6 attacking now the pawn on e4, we have e5, king to f8, king to d3, and now after bishop to e5, bishop to e5, rook to e5, and here the revenge engine also grabbed this pawn. But okay, here the king comes into the game, king to g7, we have rook to e4, f6, very important move, because if you take rook takes e5, then of course f takes e5, and this is now a passer, which is of course completely winning for black, because these two pawns are holding simply the whole position. Even if you try some ideas of b4, we can play c takes b4, and now the king is stretched. Even if you try to push this pawn, we will catch up with this pawn, and no one will ever stop this one, because even if you grab, for instance, the a5 pawn, this pawn will be rolling, and then of course it will be promoted to queen. So this is not working. After move f6, here in the continuation we had rook to g4, f5, we had rook to g3, king to h6, and after king to d2 we have rook to e4, rook to d3, now f4, simply pushing the pawn further, rook to d5, and after f3, rook to d6, and here in the continuation after king to h5, rook to f6 was played, and in this position this engine revenge resigned. Why did it resign? Because we can still play this one, king to g4. Even if you take here the pawn on g6, we can take out this pawn, and the problem is now the king is cut off. That's the most important thing here to recognize. Even if you go behind the pawn, the king will be included into the attack. Then king to f2, we have to just stay here with this rook on the e file. Then of course the king cannot come here and protect the potential promotion. So this is now a completely winning endgame here for black. So really good stuff by the Stockfish engine. Let's go back. In my opinion, very nice line that you should memorize. A3, then a5, just stop the progress on the b4. As we said, probably e3 is here the main line for white. White should make progress like this, because it forces now the move bishop to c5, and this line I think leads into a good game for white. We will explain in the continuation of the series more about this lines, also from white's perspective but also from black's perspective. But as I said, here for instance the b3 move was already an accurate move here by white, and from this point on Stockfish got its equality and then destroyed this other engine revenge in a really beautiful way. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the normal line of the Albin Countergambit. If you want to see more about the Albin Countergambit, check out my previous analysis in which we have seen three important videos. As I said, first we have seen the Lasker trap, but also the most important mistakes by white and black that are possible. And if you want to see the whole Queen's Gambit Declined series, check out our Queen's Gambit Declined series playlist here, in which we have seen more than 50 videos about some other openings like the Harvest Attack, Chigorin defense, Semi-Taraj defense, Taraj defense, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chats is the best, of course.